This is not getting discussed on the mainstream media. Not only are they wrong legally, but the fact that they would do this is outrageous. This is an overreaction and really nonsense. How would you react if this was your son or your daughter? It's the offense of knowing the truth. It's the offense of having an alternate worldview. Saying God bless you to someone is not a violation of the law.
Welcome to the broadcast, everybody. We are going to be joined by our friend Chris Mitchell. He's the bureau chief for CBN News, based in Jerusalem. Obviously, the issue is ISIS. The issue is the Middle East. And this horrendous situation in Syria where Christians, again, now it looks like 220 held captive. Many have already been killed as the suspicion. We don't know. That's not been confirmed yet, but that's what it looks like. ISIS taking Christian prisoners, putting women into slavery. This is what we're dealing with right now on the ground in the Middle East.
Chris Mitchell is the bureau chief for CBN News of the bureau in Jerusalem. He's a dear friend and someone that's been covering what's going on not only with ISIS, but in the greater Middle East. Chris has a brand new book out called Destination Jerusalem, ISIS, Convert or Die, Christian Persecution, and Preparing for the Days Ahead, Destination Jerusalem. So let's talk about this for a moment.
Sure.
I, as you know, wrote a book on ISIS as well.
That's right.
I did the combination of ISIS and Hamas because I look at ISIS coming from the east, moving towards Jerusalem. I look at Hamas coming from the west, moving towards Jerusalem. You could certainly look at Hezbollah in the south, and you got this, basically confluence of activity. But you have been in the field, Chris, and we've got video that people are watching of this right now, of you reporting in the field. Give us your take right now on the status for Christians in Syria and Iraq. You've been there. What's it like?
Well, right now it's awful for them. I mean, they were given 4 choices, Jay. They could either leave the homes they had been in for maybe generations or years. Then they were given the choice they could stay and they could pay the jizya tax, the Islamic tax for infidels, which was usually something they couldn't afford. Then they could convert, by saying the Shahada, the Islamic creed, in front of 2 witnesses, or they could die by the sword. So this is the 4 choices that Christians were given. So it's right now, most of them, tens of thousands of them have fled ISIS and now are living in refugee camps. They're living in churches or schools in Erbil and different areas.
You dedicated the portion of the book, or at least talked about Canon Andrew White. Been a dear friend of ours. We supported his work. Right. He's had to move from Iraq to Jordan because of the threats on his life, and he's basically relocated a lot of these young kids to be educated in Jordan. What is the day-to-day situation like for Christians right now that are dealing with this unbelievable amount of terror? Jihadist armies is what it really is. Right. What's it like for them?
Well, they're living in fear. Just a couple of days ago, maybe 200 Christians were abducted. Yeah. Some of the men were taken
220 is the number today.
Abducted to an undisclosed location for the men. Who knows what their fate's going to be? The women perhaps sold into sex slavery. So living under the shadow of terror that we haven't seen in generations or centuries.
Do you think this is worse than Al-Qaeda?
Oh, yes, very much so. I think it's morphed into something, or metastasized into something we haven't seen in a long, long time. This kind of barbarism that the world is witnessing right now.
When you look at, you've been in the conflicts when it's with Hamas, when you look at ISIS, we drew a parallel that a lot of the goals were the same. That's the destruction of Israel. Of course, ISIS focused more on the establishment of the caliphate. You put this in the book. In your book, you talk about, the establishment of the caliphate. How significant of an event, both politically and theologically, is this for the jihadist world?
It's a turning point, I think, in history. The last caliphate was in 1924, was abolished by then President Ataturk in Turkey, and I think this has been the dream ever since that was abolished by Muslims around the world, that one day the caliphate would be reestablished, which is basically this Islamic empire ruled under Islamic Sharia law. This is something they had dreamed about, and now their dream has come true. And I think it's called ripples throughout the Islamic world, where whether it's in Libya or the Sinai Peninsula, as far away as the Philippines, it's sort of fueled the imagination of many Muslims and now are pledging allegiance to ISIS.
What about this concern that we're seeing, and I think it's a sociological concern as much as anything else, where you've got people from the West, Great Britain, France, the United States. We had 3 arrested yesterday, but you've had British citizens. There are more Muslims serving in ISIS's army than serve Her Majesty's forces in Great Britain. What's with this attraction of young people from around the world
Right,
to this
right.
barbarism?
Well, it's a spiritual phenomenon, it seems, fueled by the internet, by social media. And I think there's two things going on, Jay, right now. One thing you mentioned, these Westerners, whether it's in Great Britain, America, or Europe, attracted to this kind of ideology and want to either make their way there or maybe commit lone wolf attacks in London or wherever. Maybe even the Mall of America, like some have been encouraged to do. The other thing I think that's going on, Jay, within ISIS itself, there's maybe 8 to 12 million people, and they're indoctrinating a new generation of young jihadis, 8, 10, 12-year-old, that are pledging their allegiance to al-Baghdadi, to the caliph, and to the caliphate. And I think we're going to be dealing with this for years to come.
Well, I said we could be engaged in the 1,000-year war here. I mean, this has that kind of feel. It's intergenerational. There's no doubt in my mind that the United States could lead a real military coalition and crush ISIS, which is, I think, the only way you can deal with them. You can't contain them, they have to be crushed. We've got the military capacity to do it. The question, of course, politically is, do we have the will? And apparently, with the authorization for use of military force the president put forward, we don't. You're holding in your hand something I want to get to here. This is a Bible.
That's right, New Testament.
Where did this come from?
Well, when we after ISIS took over Mosul and which is ancient Nineveh, thousands of Christians they fled, and we interviewed a number of them, and one of them was this man who gave me this New Testament. His name was Fadi, and he said that he had actually been snitched on by his neighbors who told ISIS he was a Christian. They searched his house and they found 2 New Testaments. This one, which is camouflage, given to him by a U.S. service member. The other one was a New Testament, Psalms and Proverbs, that had an American flag on the inside. So they accused Fadi of being either a missionary or a spy. And miraculously, he escaped. And as we did the interview with him, and we're doing the interview now here with showing our faces, we had to do his interview with just showing his profile so he wasn't going to be identified because he's on an ISIS hit list. And he said he just broke down during the interview. He sobbed. He felt like his life was over. He has an 8-year-old son. He has a teenage daughter. And now he doesn't know what's going to happen to them. Will they be educated? And during the interview, he said, Jesus, save me and also forgive ISIS. And he was just weeping as he said that. So after the interview, he gave me this. And at the time, I thought I shouldn't accept it. It's such a personal and special memento. And yet I thought I shouldn't refuse it. And so he gave me this, and I keep it as a reminder of the tens of thousands of Christians right now that have suffered through ISIS and throughout the Middle East. And that's something you're doing, Jay, through your different programs, your radio show, raising awareness about the persecuted brothers and sisters in the Middle East. And that's why I wrote Destination Jerusalem in large part, to help inform the West, the United States, Europe, others around the world that need to know who our suffering brothers and sisters are. And the second thing I had, Jay, here was a piece of candy. And after we interviewed Fadi, we went over to a Catholic churchyard. Dozens of families there. It was in the middle of the summer, maybe 100 degrees or more, and most people had lost everything. And after our interviews, one lady came up to me, and she gave me a piece of candy. And the piece of candy was maybe the last thing she could do to show some sign of hospitality. And so I just keep both of these as a reminder of what our brothers and sisters are going through right now.
Right now, the unthinkable is happening. Faithful Christians are being kidnapped, tortured, beheaded, and crucified simply because they are Christians. This is genocide, and it won't stop unless we do something about it. At the ACLJ, we're on the front lines in Washington, D.C., at the United Nations, and in the region advocating for those who cannot defend themselves. But we cannot do it alone. We need your support, and we need it now. Go to aclj.org right now and help us fight to restore Christians to their homes and families. The ACLJ has the global and strategic resources to engage the decision makers, fight against persecution, and protect the faithful Christians in these regions. With every passing minute, the threat against Christians grows and intensifies. We need your help to get our leaders to understand that Christians overseas are under attack and need our help. Your support can help the ACLJ stop the senseless and evil persecution. Call the number on your screen or go to aclj.org.
Chris, let's talk about the military side of this. The
right.
president has put forward an authorization for use of military force that specifically does not allow for ground combat, basically, or what they call enduring long-term conflict. It's very unclear what he wants. I don't think it's going to pass, and even if it does, the danger, of course, is he binds the next president. So that the political ramifications of this are serious. But you've been with the Peshmerga. I mean, you've been there.
Right.
let's talk about the military capabilities, because there was a lot of criticism of the Iraqi army that as soon as ISIS came into the territory, the Iraqi army fled. What's your sense? You've been with some of these troops. What's your sense?
Well, I think they're the boots on the ground. I mean, I know the Americans are having this national debate about whether or not U.S. boots are going to be on the ground. But right now, there's maybe 150,000 Kurdish military. They're called the Peshmerga. And the Peshmerga is a word that means those that face death. And the experience that we had with them on the front lines is these are brave men and women who are literally fighting for their homeland. And so they have a vested interest in actually...
Who are they? I mean, let's talk a little. I want people to understand, because people are hearing the term Peshmerga, but who are they? What their origin? Where do they come from? What's their skin in the game, so to speak? Why are they so engaged?
Right. Well, this is the Kurdish part of Iraq.
Right.
If you could look at Iraq in three parts, it's mainly Kurdish in the north, Sunni in the middle, and maybe Shiite in the south. And they've been there for thousands of years. You can go back to the Medes and the Persians, and you can find some of the roots of the Kurdish people. And they're pro-Western, they're pro-Israel. They feel like right now they're protecting many of the Christians that have been persecuted, the Yazidis, the other ethnic groups, and they see themselves as sort of the tip of the spear right now against ISIS.
How do they view the U.S. actions? You've been with Peshmerga military leaders. How do they view U.S. action right now? When they're looking at it from there on the ground, they're the boots on the ground, so to speak. They've been fighting. We talked about that in our book. You've talked about it in yours. How do they view our inaction right now?
Well, when we were there, the one thing that the U.S. did do was the air campaign, which actually did blunt the advance of ISIS. At that time, ISIS was on the doorstep of Erbil, their capital, and many people were actually leaving the city because they thought that ISIS could invade or attack them. So they did blunt the advance of ISIS, but I think they're feeling the U.S. is not doing enough. And what they were saying to me, Jay, over and over, the military commanders in the field, please give us the weapons that we need to fight ISIS. Because many of the weapons that ISIS was using was U.S. military equipment captured after the Iraqi army fled. And they were saying ISIS can outshoot them, they can stay out of range of their guns. And the kind of weapons that we saw were antiquated and just not the kind of weapons they need.
How serious is the ISIS threat?
It's huge. It's huge. It's not only militarily, I think, we've talked about this, the U.S. Army could probably go in there and defeat them. But right now, with the inaction of the West, inability, they're gaining strength and they're gaining momentum. They're gaining loyal followers around the world because they're fueling the imagination of many of these jihadis around the globe who want to join them. So I think it's a huge threat.
Has their call for the establishment of the caliphate and then actually establishing the caliphate, has that become the rallying cry? Is that the magnet, so to speak, that's attracting these people? Is it somebody is reestablishing the Islamic world?
I think so, and I think it's something that's fueling the imagination. It's been the dream of Muslims around the world, and now these jihadis, whether in Yemen or Philippines or Libya, it's really attracted them, and obviously those from the West as well.
Is there a sense, when you talk to other leaders within the Muslim world and the Arab world in particular, what's their sense of the situation? Jordan's under a lot of pressure right now. What's your sense? You've been there. What's the sense?
We were just there a few weeks ago in Jordan, and I think the killing,
pilot.
Burning the pilot alive, it just changed the whole public opinion in Jordan. Right now, before the killing of the Jordanian pilot and burning him alive, public opinion was saying, well, we don't know if this is our fight, if this is our battle. And it just changed public opinion 180 degrees.
So I'm trying to think through the eyes of ISIS here. To kill a Jordanian pilot and to have another country then gear up its military force, they are on a conquest march. I mean, this is what they're doing these. We look at these acts and we're saying they're outrageous, they're barbaric. This is a flashback to earlier Ottoman conquest or certainly Islamic conquest. Right. But the reality is this is their recruiting tool.
Yeah, exactly. You think it's sort of counterintuitive that they would, have a whole country like Jordan turn against them, as well as Egypt. You know, the beheading of the 21 Christian Coptics on a beach in Libya, that turned Egypt in many ways against. It does seem counterintuitive, but I think this is what their goal is. They want to we were in a tent, Jay, with an Iraqi soldier, and this is just after the Iraqi army had left, and he was in intelligence. And he said that he interrogated many of the ISIS fighters, and he said to us that their goal is not only to take over that part of the Middle East and Iraq and Syria, but eventually go to Europe and eventually take over the world. And so this is a global agenda that ISIS has, and they're on the march. That's exactly what they want to do.
We did a movie a couple of years ago called The Export, and it was about Iranian exporting their version of Islam. But this is taking that up a couple of notches in one sense, in danger. But looking at the tipping points, you talk about the tipping points. The book's title, though, Destination Jerusalem.
Right.
Why that title?
Because they want to go to Jerusalem. The goal for ISIS and many of these jihadi groups is to eventually take over Jerusalem and have that as the capital of their future caliphate. And so Destination Jerusalem, that's exactly where they're heading. So there was an ad by the Likud party that was kind of tongue-in-cheek, where they had these ISIS fighters come in and they were asking
for
directions in Hebrew. It was just a reminder to the Israeli people that ISIS eventually wants to go to Jerusalem. It's a reminder to us all that that's their ultimate goal.
I want to take it to kind of the next level here, and that is personally what's happening within Christendom in Iraq. I asked this question to Andrew White. I said, so in essence, Canon White, you're telling us that there are few, if any, Christians left in Iraq. He paused emotionally and said, there may be a handful left in Iraq, very few. What is your sense? You've been to these regions, you live in these regions. Yeah. Is the Christian communities being just wiped out or relocating?
If anybody has seen it, it's been Andrew White. You know, as the vicar of the St. George's in Baghdad, he's seen most of his congregation either emigrate away or be killed or wounded because of attacks by Al-Qaeda and other groups. He's lived it out, actually, day by day. I think statistically there were about 1.4 million Christians in Iraq before the Iraqi war in 2003. Now there might be less than, or around 200,000. Ironically, many of the Christians that were living around Baghdad and subject to many of the terror attacks, they fled to Mosul. And then years later, ISIS came in, and as we interviewed him for the book as well, and he said then suddenly ISIS. And they came in, and they're just horrific stories. One story about these 4 teenage girls who were given the choice, say the words, which means say the Islamic creed and become Muslims and deny Jesus. And all 4 of them said, no, we love Jesus, he's with us, and they were beheaded. And so these are the kind of stories that are coming out of Iraq right now.
Where's the hope in this? How do you defeat this enemy, in your view?
Well, the hope, I think, is in the midst of all this, many Muslims are coming to faith in Jesus Christ. In 3 different ways. First of all, supernaturally.
Yeah.
Dreams and vision.
Yep.
It's a phenomenon that we've seen for over a decade now. It's happening all over the Muslim world. And bravely receiving Jesus and then living out their faith at the threat and the peril of their death. Yep. The second thing is that by satellite television. Satellite television is penetrating the Islamic world like never before. And the third way is internet. Not only now can they see television, but they can dialogue with people around the world. And so those 3 things have really been a breakthrough. The missionaries that I talk to in the Middle East that have been there for decades say that more Muslims are coming to faith now in the 1400-year history of Islam.
Right now, the unthinkable is happening. Faithful Christians are being kidnapped, tortured, beheaded, and crucified simply because they are Christians. This is genocide, and it won't stop unless we do something about it. At the ACLJ, we're on the front lines in Washington, D.C., at the United Nations, and in the region advocating for those who cannot defend themselves. But we cannot do it alone. We need your support, and we need it now. Go to aclj.org right now and help us fight to restore Christians to their homes and families. The ACLJ has the global and strategic resources to engage the decision makers, fight against persecution, and protect the faithful Christians in these regions. With every passing minute, the threat against Christians grows and intensifies. We need your help to get our leaders to understand that Christians overseas are under attack and need our help. Your support can help the ACLJ stop the senseless and evil persecution. Call the number on your screen or go to aclj.org.
Chris, I want to turn our attention to Iran. Iran is deemed by Israel to be an existential threat. The president here has said not so much about it being an existential threat, but clearly it's a serious threat to the United States, in my view, but it isn't without a question. I mean, if you're an Israeli, it's an existential threat. But you've got a strange convergence right now. You've got a Shia Iran. You've got a Sunni ISIS. So you've got this inter-Muslim fight, if you will. and you got the United States negotiating with Iran at the very same time. How do you view the threat from Iran right now?
Oh, it's huge, and it is an existential threat. And the thing that some people don't talk about as much as the nuclear program is their missile program. Just a few weeks ago, they saw maybe a 30-meter, that would be a 90-foot missile in the desert in Iran. And so not only are they developing a nuclear program to get a nuclear bomb, but they're also developing missiles, intercontinental ballistic missiles, that could reach not only Europe, but the east coast of the United States. And so and this is what Israeli officials have told us many, many times, it's not only a threat to Israel, it's a threat to the United States.
Do you think have we lost the focus on Iran? I mean, you got the political side of the
Right.
president doing these negotiations through the State Department, but do you have the sense that the ISIS threat has become so prevalent in the media
That's right.
because of the beheadings?
Yes.
That for Iran, this was almost the best thing that could have happened to Iran in a horrible way.
Yeah.
Because the attention is not on Iran.
Exactly.
It's on ISIS. People are
Right.
thinking, oh, we could work. Iran's more rational.
Right.
Is that phenomenon happened here?
Yeah, I think so, exactly. ISIS seems barbaric, unapproachable. How could you ever, deal with these guys? But the Iranians are, they come out and they're a little bit Western looking. They're negotiators. And so I think that definitely takes the spotlight away from the nuclear program. But the Israelis have been telling us, this kind of deal is giving Iran the legitimacy to enrich uranium. I mean, for years, the United Nations have been passing resolutions outlawing or forbidding Iran to enrich uranium, and now this tacitly gives them the ability to do.
So how do you, when you're looking at the region right now, the way from your eyes as the bureau chief of CBN News in Jerusalem, you've got the ISIS situation going on in Iraq, Syria. What about the situation? We talked about Iran. Let's go up to Libya. What's the status in Libya right now?
Well, Libya is chaos and anarchy, and
Yeah.
it's really been a breeding ground for many of these jihadi groups. So the attacks against Gaddafi back a few years ago have really just laid open a country and an area for places like ISIS, who is now threatening to go to Rome, just a couple of hundred miles away by sea.
Let's talk about that one. So that came out a couple of weeks ago. Rome is in the targets. The Vatican's under alert. Italy's under alert. Turkey, our so-called NATO ally, all indications are that people that are coming from the West to go fight with ISIS, on the ISIS team, so to speak, in their jihadist army, are coming through Turkey, and Turkey's allowing that to happen. And then you've got, of course, a lot of the oil that the ISIS army military has taken over is being black marketed through Turkey. So I look at Turkey in this crosshair, and they're a NATO ally, supposedly. How is that shaping up in the region?
Turkey is very complicit in this whole thing. Like you said, many of the ISIS fighters are coming through their borders, and I think they themselves have this goal of restoring the Neo-Ottoman Empire. I mean, the empire used to be partly based in Istanbul, and I think Erdogan's dream is restoring their caliphate, and so I think this is going...
So what would that mean for the region if you had now Turkey, a NATO ally? Yeah. We're doing a big event in Oxford on Turkey. What does this mean if Turkey continues on this? But this is not the Turkey of Ataturk anymore.
Exactly.
So what does that mean for the region if Turkey becomes this dominant Islamic government in a suit?
That's right.
They dress in a suit. But I've said this. It's like Ayatollahs wearing a suit.
Yeah.
How do you see Erdogan's government and the whole impact that could have in the region? This used to be an ally of Israel until 10 years ago.
Exactly. Ayatollahs in a suit, I think, is a great way of looking at it, Jay, because I think that their goal is the same as the Ayatollahs or ISIS, but they go about it in a more diplomatic way, in a more sort of Western style. But I think their dream is the same. If you look at some of their statements and some of their goals that they've said over the years, this is exactly what they want to do. And the other thing, Jay, I think people need to understand, whether it's going to Rome or whether it's ISIS, Iran, Erdogan, many of them, this is a battle against Christendom. It's really a battle of Western civilization, and I think that's what people in the West need to know. This is not just a regional problem. It's a Western civilization problem, sort of like Nazi Germany, facing Great Britain back in the 1930s and Europe, communism later after that. This is an existential threat to the Western civilization.
There's a lot of political analysis that are made between Neville Chamberlain and Barack Obama, and I said to someone the other day that I don't think it's actually that straightforward of a comparison, and here's why. While Neville Chamberlain was deemed to be the appeaser, the fact of the matter, if you look at the history, the British Army had been so degraded since World War I that by the time the Nazis came to power, Chamberlain, who was part of the degrading of the military, so it's his fault, but But in a sense, his appeasement was buying time for their military machine to get back into gear. That's putting the best spin on it for Chamberlain. Yeah. I think he was complicit in allowing it to fall apart and then was stuck with the situation of they don't have the military strength. We are still, the United States is still the strongest military in the world. Yet the administration's failure, and that's what I call it, a failure to engage ISIS. The president called him a JV team not that long ago. Right. This, to me, is the fundamental mistake we're making, because you're saying this is a clash of civilizations at a huge scale, and Turkey now finds themselves in the middle of it.
Right, exactly. And you know, the other thing that I think Obama has not done, and we talked about the Kurdish military. If I could, use a football analogy to them, they're sort of like the wide receiver in the end zone, saying, waving their arms to the quarterback, "Would you please give us the ball?" And if they had the military equipment, they could defeat ISIS, or they could certainly, gain some ground against them. And so I think, but your analogy is great about Chamberlain and in this.
So I don't think the president has the same excuse that Chamberlain has. Although again, Chamberlain was a large part of the problem. Let's take it one last aspect of this, and I want to talk. Because you're a man of faith, I'm a man of faith. You're talking to these Christians in Iraq that are losing everything, seeing their families killed. Let's talk about the impact on them, and what do you tell them when you're I know it's hard. You're filming them, and you got that piece of candy, and you get that's their hospitality, it's their last possession.
Right.
What do you tell them? What do you do? How do you minister to these people?
It seems overwhelming when you spend time with them. What could you do? We were in an apartment with about several families, an apartment designed for maybe 2 families, and so they had to deal with the fact of just daily life. How do you get along? What are you making for breakfast? And who's going to be walking down the hall? And just a horrendous way of actually dealing with daily life. It's hard to imagine what they're going through, and the best thing that we could do is pray for them. We would pray with them afterwards and do what we can. And I think what we could do as journalists is help tell their story. And by telling their story, we're able to help people pray for them, help people support them. I know you do through ACLJ, CBN International does as well. But the idea that I guess that's the one redeeming thing that we could do as we were there, is to help tell their story so people could help them.
The book is Destination Jerusalem: ISIS, Convert or Die, Christian Persecution, and Preparing for the Days Ahead. Chris Mitchell, the Middle East Bureau Chief for CBN News in Jerusalem, good friend of ours, a great book. You need to get it. Everybody that wants to understand these issues needs this book.
Right now, the unthinkable is happening. Faithful Christians are being kidnapped, tortured, beheaded, and crucified simply because they are Christians. This is genocide, and it won't stop unless we do something about it. At the ACLJ, we're on the front lines in Washington, D.C., at the United Nations, and in the region, advocating for those who cannot defend themselves. But we cannot do it alone. We need your support, and we need it now. Go to aclj.org right now and help us fight to restore Christians to their homes and families. The ACLJ has the global and strategic resources to engage the decision makers, fight against persecution, and protect the faithful Christians in these regions. With every passing minute, the threat against Christians grows and intensifies. We need your help to get our leaders to understand that Christians overseas are under attack and need our help. Your support can help the ACLJ stop the senseless and evil persecution. Call the number on your screen or go to aclj.org.